After my children kicked me out of the house, I took a job cleaning a billionaire's library. Every night, in secret, I would reorganize his books my own way. I thought he would never notice until I felt a whisper in my ear. "I know what you're doing." I froze in fear. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and let me know what city you're reading this from so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Annabelle, and I'm 67 years old. I never thought at this age I'd be sleeping on a friend's sofa with a suitcase full of wrinkled clothes and a heart broken into 1,000 pieces. But here I am, after my own children threw me out of the house that I helped pay for over 30 years. It all started 3 months ago when David, my oldest son, arrived with that fake smile I know so well. He brought his wife, Michelle, a woman who always looked at me as if I were a nuisance in her perfect life. They sat in my living room on the armchairs I worked so hard to buy when they were little and told me it was time I thought about my future. "Mom, you can't live alone anymore," David said, without even looking me in the eye. "We found a perfect place for you, a very nice nursing home with 24-hour nurses." Michelle nodded like a puppet, touching her pearl necklace that probably cost more than my salary for 3 months when I worked at the post office. "It's what's best for everyone, Annabelle," she murmured in that saccharine voice I hate. "We need the space for the kids." The kids, my grandchildren, whom I had barely seen in the last 2 years, because Michelle always had an excuse to keep them away from me. She'd say they had the flu, or the house was too messy, or it was too late. Always something. "But this is my house," I said, feeling my voice break. "This is where you grew up. This is where all my memories are." David stood up impatiently. "Mom, don't be so dramatic. We already talked to a lawyer. Since you don't have any other significant income, and we've been helping you with some of the expenses, we have the right to make decisions about your well-being." It was a lie. I had my savings, my small pension, my independence. But they had planned everything perfectly. For months, they had been paying a few bills here and there, creating a pattern, a dependency that they were now using against me. That night, as I quietly packed my things, I heard Michelle talking on the phone with someone. "Yes, it's almost done. As soon as she leaves, we can start the remodel. The decorator says he can have everything finished in 6 weeks." My heart shattered. They weren't sending me to a home for my own good. They were discarding me like old furniture that didn't match their new decor anymore. The next morning, David arrived with a truck. "It's time to go, Mom." His tone was cold, distant, as if he had learned to disconnect his emotions when it came to me. "What if I don't want to go?" I asked, clutching the doorframe of my bedroom. "You don't have a choice," Michelle replied from behind him. "Everything is already arranged." It was then that I knew I had lost my children forever. Not to death, but to something worse, to greed and convenience. My friend Rose took me in at her small apartment, but we both knew I couldn't stay forever. At 67, finding a job seemed impossible. No one wants to hire a woman my age, especially when you haven't worked in 5 years because you thought you were done with that stage of your life. It was Rose who saw the ad in the newspaper. Night work, private library, cleaning experience preferred, contact after 8 p.m. The salary was $300 a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. The address led me to an imposing mansion in the hills, with perfectly manicured gardens and a fountain that shimmered under the nightlights. The gate opened automatically when I pressed the buzzer, as if they were expecting me. A tall, elegant man greeted me at the door. He looked to be about 70, with perfectly coiffed gray hair and blue eyes that seemed to see too much. "You must be Annabelle," he said in a deep voice that made me think of aged whiskey. "I'm Lionel Harding. Welcome. He showed me the library, and my breath was taken away. It was like stepping into a dream. Walls covered in books from floor to ceiling, ladders that slid on golden rails, antique lamps that created pools of warm light, thousands and thousands of books, some so old they looked like scrolls. Your job is simple, Lionel explained. Clean, organize, and keep everything in order. You'll work from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. I'll be in my study most of the time, so you'll have privacy to work at your own pace. It was perfect. Too perfect to be real. The first week was like a balm for my wounded soul. I cleaned each shelf carefully, caressing the spines of the books as if they were pets. But soon I noticed something that bothered me deeply. There was no order. The books were mixed up without any system. Novels next to history books, poetry mixed with technical manuals. It was a beautiful but frustrating chaos. I couldn't resist. I started little by little, reorganizing one section each night, first by genre, then alphabetically within each category. It was something that calmed me, that made me feel useful after so many years of feeling disposable. Lionel never said anything, although sometimes I saw him watching me from the shadows of the hallway. I thought he didn't notice my quiet reorganization. I was completely wrong. It was during my third week that it happened. I was on the ladder, tidying a section of French classics, when I felt a presence behind me, a warm breath near my ear. And then, those words that chilled me to the bone. I know what you're doing. I froze, clinging to the rails of the ladder, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Tears welled up in my eyes before I could stop them. I was going to lose this job too. I was going to be left with nothing again. I climbed down the ladder trembling, waiting for the words that would send me back to the street, waiting to hear that I was fired, that I had ruined the only chance I had to stay afloat. But Lionel didn't say anything more that night. He just stood there, in the shadows, watching me as I tried to control my tears and continue cleaning as if nothing had happened. The next few days were torture. Every sound made me jump. Every step in the hallway put me on high alert. I kept working, but I didn't dare reorganize anything anymore. I left the books exactly as I found them, even though it hurt me to see that beautiful library plunged into chaos. But then the signs started to appear. The first was a cup of tea. I arrived one night and found it on the main table in the library, still steaming, with a small handwritten note. To keep the chill away, L. I thought it was a coincidence that maybe he had forgotten to take it with him, but the tea was perfect, with the exact amount of sugar I liked, even though I had never told anyone how I took it. The second sign came 3 nights later. A soft, cream-colored cashmere blanket was folded carefully on the reading chair where I sometimes sat during my breaks. There was no note this time, but it smelled faintly of lavender, like the perfume my mother used when I was a child. I started to realize that Lionel was watching me more than I thought. I would sometimes see him at the end of the hallway, just a silhouette in the gloom, but he never came close. He never spoke to me directly. It was as if he was studying me, trying to understand something that I didn't even understand myself. The third sign was what convinced me that something strange was happening. I arrived one night and found 3 books placed strategically on the main table. They weren't random books. One was about women who had overcome family tragedies, another about how to rebuild your life after 60, and the third, the one that made me tremble, was about psychological abuse in families. That night, I couldn't focus on work. I sat in the armchair, wrapped in the blanket that I now suspected was a gift, and flipped through the books. It was as if someone had been reading my soul, as if he knew exactly what I was going through. The next day, Rose told me something that made my hair stand on end. Annabelle, "A very elegant man came by yesterday asking for you," she told me as we had breakfast in her small kitchen. "He said his name was Lionel. He wanted to know if you were okay, if you needed anything." My mouth went dry. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you had problems with your kids, that they had kicked you out of your house." He looked very worried. He asked if I knew your kids' names and where they lived now. A shiver ran down my spine. Why would Lionel want to know about David and Michelle? What did my family problems have to do with him? That night, I arrived at work with more questions than answers. Lionel was waiting for me in the library, sitting in his favorite chair by the fireplace. For the first time in the 4 weeks I had been working for him, he spoke to me directly. "Annabelle, could we talk for a moment?" My heart sped up. This was the conversation I had been dreading. He was going to fire me. I knew it. I sat on the edge of the armchair, my hands clasped in my lap, preparing for the worst. "I've noticed you've been reorganizing the books," he began, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the final blow. "And I want you to know that it doesn't bother me." I opened my eyes, confused. "On the contrary, this library has been in disarray for years," he continued, looking toward the shelves. "My wife was the one who kept it organized. When she died 5 years ago, I lost the interest in keeping things in place. But seeing you work, seeing you care for these books as if they were treasures, reminds me why this room was so special to us." He fell silent for a moment, lost in some memory. "Your friend told me about your children," he finally said, and I felt my stomach shrink. "About how they treated you." "Mr. Harding, that has nothing to do with my job," I murmured, embarrassed. "You're right," he nodded. "But it does have to do with the type of person you are, and with why I decided to hire you before I even met you." I was speechless. What did he mean by that? "Annabelle, I've been looking into your children." The words hit me like a bucket of cold water. "What?" "David and Michelle Patterson. He works for an accounting firm. She's a real estate agent. They bought your house for $60,000, less than its real value, by taking advantage of your situation. They've already put it up for sale for $250,000 more than they paid." The world came crashing down around me. "How? How do you know all that?" Lionel leaned forward, his blue eyes shining with an intensity that frightened me. "Because I have resources, Annabelle, and because when I see an injustice, I can't stand idly by." "But why? You barely know me." "That's true," he admitted. "But I know enough. I know a woman who cleans these books as if they were her own children. I know someone who reorganizes an entire library without being asked, just because she believes that beautiful things deserve to be in order. And I know a mother who was betrayed by the people she should love most." He stood up and walked toward the window, looking out into the night. "I also know something else, Annabelle, something your children don't know that I know, something that could change everything." My breathing became shallow. "What is it?" Lionel turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something close to rage in his eyes. "I know they're planning to have you declared mentally incompetent to get the money from the sale of your house. They've already hired an attorney who specializes in elderly guardianship." Lionel's words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Mentally incompetent. Those 2 words resonated in my head like a death sentence. I clung to the arms of the armchair, feeling the world sway around me. "That's impossible," I whispered, though my voice was so weak I could barely hear myself. "I'm perfectly fine. I work here. I manage my affairs. There's no reason to—" "Annabelle," Lionel interrupted me gently, returning to his chair. "Adult children who want to take control of their parents' assets don't need many reasons. They just need a shrewd lawyer and a psychologist willing to sign a paper." He leaned forward, his hands clasped. They've already visited a doctor who specializes in these cases. They told him you're confused, that you sometimes don't recognize people, that you leave the stove on. Lies, of course, but well-constructed lies. I felt the tears start to flow again. For the last few months, ever since they kicked me out of the house, I had been fighting the feeling that it was all my fault, that maybe I really was a burden to my children. But hearing this, knowing that they had planned to destroy my reputation and my autonomy, was worse than any nightmare. "How do you know all this?" I asked, wiping my cheeks with the back of my hand. Lionel sighed deeply. "Because I hired a private investigator to follow them, and because the lawyer they contacted used to work for me until I discovered he was helping families swindle their elderly parents. I fired him 3 years ago, but I maintained contacts in his office." I stared at him, trying to process everything. But why would he do all this for me? I'm just his cleaning lady. "No," he said firmly. "You are not just anything, Annabelle." He stood up and walked to one of the highest shelves, taking down a wooden box that looked very old. He placed it on the table between us and opened it carefully. Inside were documents, photographs, and what looked like official reports. "6 months ago," he began, "my granddaughter Sarah visited me. She's 23 and studying social work. She told me about a case she had seen during her professional training. An elderly woman whose family had manipulated her to take her house and send her to a nursing home against her will." He took a photograph from the box. It was a blurred image taken from a distance, but I could recognize myself standing in front of what had been my house with a suitcase in my hand. Sarah was outraged by the injustice of the case. She kept investigating on her own, documenting everything. When she showed me the photos and told me the story, something inside me broke. His eyes softened as he looked at me. "Do you know why, Annabelle? Because 40 years ago, something similar happened to my own parents. My siblings convinced them that I was a failure, that I would never amount to anything in life. They manipulated them into disinheriting me and kicking me out of the house when I was 28. He sat back down, with the open box between us like a bridge between our stories of pain. I spent decades building my fortune, partly out of pride, partly to prove them wrong. When I finally succeeded, it was too late. My parents had died without us being able to reconcile. My siblings had taken everything and lost it due to bad investments." He gently touched one of the photographs in the box. "When Sarah told me your story, it was as if the universe was giving me a second chance. I couldn't save my parents, but maybe I could help you. So the job," I began, and he nodded. "The job was real. I did need someone to care for this library, it's true, but I specifically looked for someone in your situation. I placed the ad in places where I knew a woman in your position would see it." I fell silent, taking everything in. On one hand, I felt manipulated, as if I had been part of some experiment. On the other hand, there was a strange warmth in knowing that someone had fought for me when I didn't even know I needed someone to fight. "The documents in this box," Lionel continued, "are copies of everything your children have done. The fraudulent deeds, the fake medical reports, the communications with the lawyer. I have enough evidence to send them to jail." I felt a shiver of fear mixed with something close to hope. "And what do you plan to do with that information?" "That decision is yours, Annabelle. But before you decide, there's something else you need to know." He took another document from the box, this one thicker than the others. "Tomorrow afternoon, David and Michelle are coming here." My blood ran cold. "Here? How do they know where I work?" "Because I invited them." I got up from the armchair so fast I felt dizzy. "What? Why would you do that?" Lionel remained calm, though I saw tension in his jaw. "Because it's time they face the consequences of their actions, and because I want you to see, with your own eyes, who they really are when they think no one is watching? I don't understand. Annabelle, they think they're coming here to meet your boss, to convince him that you're a problematic employee who needs medical supervision. They're going to try to use my influence to accelerate the process of having you declared incompetent. The room began to spin around me. I sat back down, clinging to the armchair. I told them on the phone that I had noticed some strange behaviors in you, that I was worried about your mental well-being, that maybe they were right in their health concerns. Why would you tell them that? I exclaimed, feeling betrayed. Because I want them to relax, to let their guard down. I want them to reveal exactly how far they're willing to go to destroy you. He leaned toward me, his blue eyes shining with determination. And I want you to hear them. I want you to hear with your own ears how they talk about you when they think you're defenseless, because I suspect that a part of you still loves them, still hopes that maybe there's a misunderstanding, that maybe they can change. He was right. Despite everything, a part of me still clung to the hope that David, my oldest son, the boy who used to cuddle with me during storms, would find some love in his heart, that he would remember who I was before Michelle poisoned him against me. Tomorrow, Lionel said firmly, that hope is going to die, and when it does, you'll be free to make the decision you need to make. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake on Rose's sofa, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I had the courage to face what was coming. For 67 years, I had been a woman who avoided conflict, who preferred peace to justice. But as I lay there in the darkness, I thought about Lionel risking his reputation to protect me. I thought about his granddaughter, Sarah, a young woman who didn't even know me, but who had documented my suffering because she cared about justice. And for the first time in months, I felt something I had forgotten existed. Rage. A clean, pure rage against the people who had taken my love and used it as a weapon against me. The next afternoon arrived too quickly. Lionel had asked me to come 2 hours earlier than my usual shift, and when I entered through the main door of the mansion instead of the service entrance I normally used, I felt like I was entering a completely different territory. "You're going to be in the next room," Lionel explained, as he guided me down a hallway I had never seen before. "There's a glass panel you can see through, but they can't see you, and everything is being recorded." He showed me a small but elegant room with a comfortable armchair positioned in front of a wall that looked normal, but was actually a one-way window. From there, I could see perfectly into the library, where I had spent so many nights reorganizing books and finding peace. "Are you sure I want to do this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "No," he answered honestly, "but I think you need to do it. To be able to move forward, you need to see the complete truth." I sat in the armchair, my hands clasped in my lap, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 4 o'clock, I heard the doorbell. Moments later, the familiar voices of David and Michelle filled the library. Seeing them after so many months hit me like a slap in the face. David wore his most expensive suit, the one I had helped him buy for his first job interview. Michelle wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my 3 months' salary when I worked at the post office. "Mr. Harding," I heard David's voice, soft and professional. "Thank you so much for having us. We are very concerned about our mother." Lionel invited them to sit, offering them tea, which Michelle declined with a dismissive gesture. "I understand you've noticed some worrying behaviors in Annabelle," Lionel said, his acting perfect. "I'm glad you reached out to me." Michelle leaned forward, her eyes shining with an intensity that made me feel nauseous. "Mr. Harding, you seem like an intelligent and successful man. Surely you understand the importance of protecting your interests. Having an employee with mental issues could be a big risk for you." "What kind of issues?" Lionel asked, his voice neutral. David took the floor, and listening to him, I felt as if a stranger were speaking with my son's voice. Memory loss, confusion, obsessive behaviors. Last month, we found her reorganizing the same drawers over and over, not remembering she had already done it. And last week, she called us asking about her sister, who died 15 years ago. Lies. Every word that came out of his mouth was a fabricated lie. My sister was alive and well, living in Florida, and I had never had memory problems in my life. We've also noticed that she's hoarding things, Michelle added, taking out her phone. Look at these photos. From my position, I could see that she was showing him pictures of my old room, but the images had been manipulated to make it look full of garbage and mess. In reality, I had always kept my space immaculately clean. My goodness, Lionel murmured, in perfect performance. I had no idea things were so bad. That's why we need to act fast, David said, taking some documents out of his briefcase. We've consulted with a geriatric mental health specialist. He's willing to evaluate her and issue a certificate of mental incompetence that would allow us to make the necessary decisions for her well-being. And what kind of decisions would those be? Lionel asked. Michelle straightened up like a predator who has spotted her prey. Well, obviously she would need to be in a place where she can receive 24-hour professional care. We've already found an excellent institution that only costs $200 a month. Only $200 a month. She said it as if it were a bargain, as if my freedom and dignity had a sale price. And of course, David continued, we would need full access to her finances to manage her care. The sale of her previous home gave us approximately $120,000 that we could wisely invest to ensure her future. Lie after lie. The house had sold for $280,000, and they had taken most of the money. I understand your concern, Lionel said carefully, but I wonder, have you considered other options? Maybe bringing in a nurse at home or finding a day program for seniors. David and Michelle exchanged a look that chilled me. Mr. Harding, Michelle said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, we appreciate your concern, but we believe we've been patient enough. Frankly, we've been carrying this responsibility for too long. Responsibility, David repeated, and the way he said the word broke my heart. Look, my mother was a good person in her time, but now she's a burden. We can't keep sacrificing our lives and those of our children for someone who doesn't even recognize us half the time. Besides, Michelle added, her voice turning harder, it's not like she's going to get better. She's only going to get worse. And the longer we wait, the more money it's going to cost to take care of her. Lionel leaned back in his chair, studying them. I'm surprised to hear this. In my interactions with Annabelle, I have found her to be quite lucid. In fact, she has been reorganizing my library in a way that demonstrates a very organized and capable mind. David laughed, but it was a cold, hollow laugh. Yes, she's always been obsessive about order, but that doesn't mean she's sane. In fact, that obsession is part of the problem. And honestly, Michelle said, her mask of filial concern finally falling completely. We can't keep pretending we care anymore. We want our lives back. We want to be able to travel without worrying about whether she left a stove on or if she's wandering the streets in her pajamas. I've never done any of those things, I whispered from my hiding place, but of course they couldn't hear me. So, Lionel said slowly, what you're asking me is to testify that Annabelle is incompetent, based on my observation that she keeps my library organized. Exactly, David said, visibly relieved that Lionel seemed to understand. Your testimony as her employer would be very valuable to our case. Lionel stood up from his chair and walked to the window, turning his back on them. And once you get legal custody, What will happen to the money you mentioned? The $120,000 from the house sale. Well, Michelle said quickly, obviously that money would be used for her care, for the institution, medications, everything necessary. Of course, Lionel murmured, and I assume you would be the administrators of those funds. Naturally, David said, we're her family. No one else is going to take care of her. Lionel turned to them, and although I couldn't see his expression from my angle, something in his posture changed. There's something that intrigues me, he said, his voice still calm, but with a different tone. If Annabelle is as sick as you say, how is it possible that she has been working for me for a month without me noticing any problems? David and Michelle went stiff. Well, David stammered, she sometimes has moments of lucidity. And besides, Michelle interrupted, you only see her at night when she's calm. The problems mainly appear during the day, when there's more stress. I understand, Lionel said. In that case, I wonder if you could explain this to me. He took a folder from his desk and opened it. Because I have here the complete documentation of the sale of Annabelle's house, and according to these official records, the house sold for $280,000, not $120,000 as you claimed. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence that followed Lionel's words was so thick I could feel it pressing against my eardrums. From my hiding place, I saw David and Michelle look at each other, their faces pale as wax. Michelle was the first to recover, her training as a real estate agent helping her think fast under pressure. Mr. Harding, she said with a forced smile, I think there's some confusion. The numbers you have must include commissions and other expenses. No, Lionel interrupted her, his voice now completely stripped of any pretense of friendliness. These are the net numbers. You received $280,000 for your mother's house, and according to my records, you also emptied her savings account, which contained another $32,000. David got up abruptly, his face now red with anger instead of pale with fear. I don't know who gave you that information, but you're completely wrong. And frankly, I don't see how our family financial matters are any of your business. They become my business, Lionel said coldly, when you try to use my testimony to commit fraud. Michelle also stood up, clutching her purse as if it were a shield. I think this conversation has gone too far. David, let's go. It's obvious Mr. Harding has been influenced by your mother's fantasies. But Lionel wasn't finished. Sit down, he said, and there was something in his voice that made both of them obey automatically. Because there's more. He took out another folder, this one thicker than the first. I have here copies of your communications with attorney Mitchell Reeves, who specializes in elderly guardianship cases. I have the transcripts of your conversations with Dr. Harold Beck, who is willing to declare a woman mentally incompetent that he has never examined in exchange for $5,000. David's face crumpled. Michelle looked about to throw up. I also have, Lionel continued relentlessly, recordings of your phone conversations where you discuss how to divide Annabelle's money once she's declared incompetent. It was then that David completely lost control. Okay, fine, yes, we took the money, but it's not theft, it's compensation. Do you know how much we've spent on that woman over the years? Do you know how much it cost me when I had to miss work to deal with her dramas? Or how much we spent on Christmas and birthday gifts for decades? Michelle grabbed his arm, trying to get him to shut up, but he was beyond any control. She owes us that money, he yelled, pointing toward the wall where I was hidden, even though he didn't know I was there. She owes us for all the years she ruined our lives with her constant need for attention and validation. What need for attention? He asked. She was always calling to complain that she felt lonely, always expecting us to visit every weekend, always commenting on what other parents received from their children. It was exhausting. Michelle finally managed to silence David, but the damage was already done. "I think," Lionel said slowly, "that there is someone who should hear this." He walked toward the wall where I was hidden and tapped it gently. It was my signal to come out. My legs trembled as I got up from the armchair. My hands trembled as I opened the door, and my heart completely broke when I saw the faces of David and Michelle, realized that I had been there the whole time. "Hello, David," I said softly, my voice calmer than I had expected. "Hello, Michelle." David looked as if he had seen a ghost. Michelle looked like a trapped animal searching for a way out. "Mom," David stammered. "No, it wasn't. I mean—" "Don't bother," I said, walking slowly toward the center of the room. "I heard everything." There was a moment of absolute silence. Then Michelle, ever the fighter, decided to attack. "You're fine," she said accusingly. "All this time we've been worried about you, and you're perfectly fine." "Yes," I replied simply. "I'm fine. I was always fine. You invented everything." "But the doctor said—" "The doctor never saw me," I interrupted her. "And you know that because you paid him to say what you needed him to say." David finally found his voice. "Mom, you can be angry, but you need to understand that everything we did was for your own good. You can't live alone forever. And we—" "You what?" I asked, feeling stronger with every word. "You're concerned about me? Like you were concerned when you kicked me out of my house? Like you were concerned when you sold that house without even telling me how much you got for it?" Lionel came closer and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Annabelle, there's something else I want you to know before you decide what to do next." I turned to him, confused. What else could there be? "When I started investigating your case," he said, looking me directly in the eyes, "it was just for justice. I wanted to right a wrong, to help someone who had been treated unfairly." He paused, as if the next words were difficult to say. "But in these last few weeks, seeing how you care for this library, seeing the kindness with which you treat each book as if it were a treasure, seeing how you find beauty and order in the midst of chaos, I have discovered something I didn't expect." My heart began to beat faster. I have discovered that at 70 years old, when I thought my heart was too tired to feel love again, I have fallen in love with you. The words hit me like a lightning bolt. Behind me, I heard Michelle gasp audibly. "Lionel," I whispered, not knowing what else to say. "I don't expect anything," he continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that there is someone in this world who sees you not as a burden or a problem to solve, but as an extraordinary woman who deserves to be loved and respected." I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of pain. David cleared his throat loudly. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Mom, you can't be seriously considering—" "Considering what?" I turned to him, my voice now firm as steel. "Can't be considering what, David? Being happy, being loved, having a life worth living." "But you're 67, Michelle protested. "Don't you think it's a little late for romance?" I laughed, and it was the first time I had genuinely laughed in months. "Michelle, you're 35, and you've been married to my son for 12 years, and I've never seen you show a shred of the genuine respect and affection that Lionel has shown me in 1 month." I turned to Lionel, who was looking at me with an expression of hope mixed with fear. "I don't know if what I feel is love," I told him honestly, "but I know that when I'm with you, when I'm in this library, I feel like the person I used to be before they convinced me that I was worthless." "That's enough to start," he said softly. David took a step toward us, but Lionel raised a hand to stop him. "I think you've heard enough," Lionel said firmly, "and I think it's time for you to leave." "What if we don't want to leave?" Michelle asked defiantly. Lionel smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Then I'll call the police and hand over all the evidence I have of your fraud. Do you prefer to leave on your own or with handcuffs?" David and Michelle exchanged a desperate look. Finally, David turned to me one last time. "Mom, if you do this, if you marry him, you'll never see your grandchildren again." For a moment, the threat hurt me, as it had hurt all the other times they had used my grandchildren as a weapon against me. But then I realized something. I hadn't seen my grandchildren in 2 years anyway. They had already taken them from me. "David," I said calmly, "I don't see them anymore. You haven't changed a thing except to finally admit what I already knew." It was the last conversation I had with my children. 6 months later, I am sitting in the same library where I once cleaned the floors as an employee, but now as the lady of the house. There is a cup of tea next to me, steaming gently in the autumn afternoon, and a book of poetry open in my lap. But I'm not reading, I'm remembering. The day after the confrontation with David and Michelle, Lionel and I sat in this same room and talked for hours, not about love or romance, but about pain, about the betrayal of our families, about lost years, about the fear of trusting again. "We don't have to rush," he had told me, taking my hand in his. "We have time, probably more time than you think." He was right. At 67, I had assumed that my life was essentially over, that all I had left was to wait for the end with as much dignity as possible. But Lionel taught me that the final chapters of a life can be the most beautiful if they are written with the right people. We got married 3 months later in a small ceremony in the mansion's garden. It was just us, Rose as my witness, and Sarah, Lionel's granddaughter, who had started this whole story by documenting my suffering. Sarah cried throughout the ceremony, but they were tears of joy. "Grandpa," she said to Lionel after we exchanged vows, "I've never seen you so happy." And it was true. Lionel radiated a peace he hadn't had when I met him. He later confessed to me that for the 5 years since his first wife's death, he had been simply existing, not living. "You brought me back to life," he told me that night as we danced slowly in the library under the soft lights. But the real satisfaction came 2 weeks after our wedding. I was organizing some new books that Lionel had bought when I heard familiar voices at the main entrance. David and Michelle had come uninvited, with the kids this time, my grandchildren, whom I had last seen 3 years ago. "You can't just show up here," I heard Thomas, the butler Lionel had hired to help me manage the house, say. "She's our mother," David insisted. "We have a right to see her." "Not after what you did," Thomas replied firmly. Mrs. Harding was very clear about this. Mrs. Harding. Even after 3 months, that name still made me smile. I went down the stairs slowly, taking my time. When I got to the foyer, I found David and Michelle standing uncomfortably by the door, with my 2 grandchildren hiding behind them. The children had grown so much I barely recognized them. "Annabelle," David said, using my name for the first time in years instead of Mom. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," I replied calmly. "You had your chance to talk, and you used it to try to destroy me." Michelle stepped forward, holding the youngest girl's hand. "Look, I know things got out of hand, but the kids miss their grandmother." It was a lie, of course. The children looked at me as if I were a stranger, which was exactly what I was to them. Years had passed since David and Michelle had allowed me to have a real relationship with them. "The kids miss me," I repeated slowly. "How interesting." Because when I asked if I could see them for my birthday last year, Michelle told me they were too busy. And when I wanted to take them to the zoo last summer, David told me they preferred to stay at home. David's face turned red. That was different. We were protecting the kids from your erratic behavior. "My erratic behavior," I murmured. and then I laughed. David, the only erratic behavior here was yours, trying to steal my money and my freedom. It was then that the youngest girl, Emma, spoke for the first time. Grandma, why does Dad say you're sick? You look fine. My heart broke a little. This child had been manipulated into believing her grandmother was crazy, that she was someone to be feared. I knelt down to her level. I'm not sick, sweetheart Emma. Your dad and mom made that up because they wanted to keep money that didn't belong to them. That's not true, Michelle burst out. You can't say that to a child. Why not? I asked, getting up. It's the truth. Or would you prefer she grow up believing the same lies you invented? David changed tactics, as he always did when he was cornered. All right, we made mistakes, but we're family, Mom. Surely we can get past this. Family. I repeated the word as if it were poison in my mouth. Do you know what I discovered about real family, David? That it has nothing to do with blood. Lionel appeared at that moment, as if he had been waiting for the perfect signal. He placed a protective hand on my back. Is there a problem here? He asked, although his tone made it clear that he already knew the answer. No problem, David said quickly. We're just visiting Mom. Without an invitation, Lionel added. On private property, after you were specifically asked not to return. Michelle raised her chin defiantly. You can't keep us away from her forever. We have legal rights. Lionel smiled, but it was the smile of a shark. Legal rights? Like the legal right you had to steal the money from the sale of her house, or the legal right to falsify medical reports? David paled. Because I should mention, Lionel continued, that although Annabelle chose not to press criminal charges against you, that decision can change at any time, particularly if you continue to harass her. It's not harassment, David protested. It's what? I interrupted. Is it another manipulation? Another plan to control me? Or maybe you heard that I now have access to real money and you want to try another scam? The silence that followed gave me the answer I needed. That's exactly what it is, I said, feeling a deep sadness, but also a crystal clear clarity. You don't miss me. You miss what you thought you could get from me. Emma pulled on Michelle's skirt. Mommy, why does Grandma look so sad? Michelle quickly picked her up. Because Grandma has become a very bitter person, honey. That was the last straw. Thomas, I said, without taking my eyes off Michelle, please call security. It won't be necessary, David said quickly. We're leaving. But before he left, he turned to me one last time. Mom, when you get tired of playing rich, when he gets bored of you, remember that we are your true family. We'll be the only ones left. David, I said softly, you are not my family. You are a stranger who shares my blood. My family is here, in this house, with the people who love me unconditionally. I watched them walk down the circular path, get into their car, and disappear through the main gate. I knew they wouldn't come back. They had nothing more to gain from me, and without the possibility of a benefit, they had no interest in staying in contact. That night, as Lionel and I had dinner in the main dining room, I asked him something that had been on my mind for weeks. Do you ever regret getting involved in all this mess with me? He put down his fork and looked at me with those blue eyes that had learned to read every expression on my face. Annabelle, before I met you, this house was a mausoleum. I was a man living among memories, waiting for death. You brought me back to life. How could I regret that? But you lost the opportunity to have a quiet old age, I insisted. Instead, you married a woman with a toxic family and a complicated past. Lionel stood up and came to kneel by my chair, taking my hands in his. My love, he said, and my heart still skipped a beat every time he called me that. You don't have a toxic family. You have toxic people who used to take advantage of your kindness, but they no longer have power over you. He was right. In the months since our wedding, I had flourished in ways I never thought possible at my age. Lionel had enrolled me in art classes, something I had always wanted to do but could never afford. We had traveled to Paris, where we saw masterpieces together that I had only known in books. We had organized dinners for other older couples, creating a small community of people who understood the gift of finding love in old age. But most importantly, I had regained my sense of self-worth. I no longer woke up every morning wondering what I had done wrong to deserve my children's rejection. Instead, I woke up wondering what new adventure Lionel and I could share that day. This morning, while organizing my favorite section of the library, I found a note that Lionel had hidden between the pages of a book of poems by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It simply said, "To the woman who taught me that it's never too late for a new beginning, with all my love, L." Now, as the sun sets through the tall windows of the library, I think about the path that brought me here. It started with the deepest pain I had ever known, being rejected by my own children. But that pain led me to this place, to this life, to this love that I never sought, but now can't imagine living without. I hear Lionel's footsteps in the hallway, returning from his evening walk through the gardens. In a few moments, he will walk through that door with a smile on his face and ask me about my day, truly wanting to hear the answer. He'll tell me about the flowers that are starting to bloom and about the book he's reading. And later, after dinner, we'll dance slowly in this very library as the stars appear in the autumn sky. David was right about one thing. Lionel and I probably don't have forever. At our ages, every day is a gift. But maybe that's why this love is so pure, so intense. We don't have time for games, for manipulations, for taking each other for granted. The door opens and Lionel enters, exactly as I predicted, with a smile on his face. "How was your afternoon, my love?" he asks, kissing the top of my head. "Perfect," I reply, and for the first time in 67 years, it's completely true.